Okay, my next hat will be my inspector hat, and I'm going to talk about record keeping specifically. So I mentioned that record keeping is a required part of all dairy nutrient programs out there. Most dairy nutrient management plans that are written identify and provide technical assistance to get you on the right track with managing your records. The records are important because they tell a story about how you're managing your nutrients on the ground. We can walk out into a field and we can see that it's flooded, or we can see that it's flourishing with green grass, but we can't see what's going on underneath the ground. So while the Dairy Nutrient Management Act was originally written to address surface water, the record-keeping portion is the bit that addresses groundwater, agronomic rates. So the records are required for, in 2009, it's a violation for a failure to keep 5 years worth of records that demonstrate that your nutrient applications are within agronomic rates. So the 5 years are pretty important here. If you haven't been in dairy for 5 years, you're not going to have 5 years worth of records. But if you've been in dairy for 5 years, we want to see all 5 of those. If you're missing year 1 and year 5, then we only have 3 of the 5 chapters of the book that tells your story about how you're managing your nutrients. So it's really important. Now in 2012, the Rule 16-611 was written that identifies exactly what records are required. And I saw that King Conservation District provided a handout in the back. It's the record-keeping fact sheet, nutrient management record-keeping requirements. Make sure you pick one of these up. Now, dairies should all have one. I handed them out. The inspector before me handed them out. These are good for anybody. This is information that will benefit you as you go forth and grow crops and manage nutrients. So kind of keep that in mind for record keeping. The very first thing on the list is nutrient analysis. If you are producing manure and you're using your manure, we want to know what's in there. And that's important for you as far as planning for meeting your crop nutrient needs. You have to know what's in there. So nutrient analysis of solids, of liquids, of any organic material that's coming on your site. Annually, you have to do a nitrate analysis of your nutrients. We require, let's see here. We require that you have, let's see, liquid, solid, commercial fertilizer. Oh yeah, commercial fertilizer. You've already got the nutrient analysis on that. But if you're using commercial fertilizer, make sure you're recording it, because it's part of that story about how much manure or nutrients you're putting on your ground. So nitrate, you're required to have organic nitrogen, ammonia nitrogen, and phosphorus levels tested for all those nutrient sources. And I think I've got another slide here. Oh, this is kind of a good one because it shows pond 1, 2, and 3, all sampled on March 9th. You want to sample all of the sources because this is ammonia right here. It's going to vary depending on where your source is coming from pretty dramatically. You have half as much ammonia, so available nitrogen. This is one of the plant available nitrogens from pond 3 as you do from pond 1. So this is probably a primary lagoon right here where the manure is first going in. So if you're trying to plan for crop needs, you better know what's in the manure. If you're fertilizing with liquid out of pond 3, you're not putting much manure, much nutrient on your crop. So all sources, it's pretty darn important. Let's see here. Oops, I'm going to go back one here. So phosphorus levels, we talked a little bit about phosphorus levels. One of the funny things about phosphorus is that we don't actually have a good way in Washington right now. Most nutrient plans are written to be balanced on nitrogen. And if you're a manure-based system, whether you're a crop farmer or a dairy, and you're using manure as your nutrient, you're always going to be putting on more phosphorus than your crop needs. So at some point, this phosphorus number is going to become really important depending on your soil type, depending on the risk for phosphorus runoff, but you need to be keeping track of your phosphorus also. So the numbers that, as an inspector, I'm really looking for are these nitrogen numbers and your phosphorus numbers. If you're feeding your critters, Joe mentioned this, your potassium number right here, Crops are luxury feeders of potassium, and if you're feeding forage, a forage type that will take up that potassium, there's potential herd health impacts from the potassium. So all of these numbers are pretty important to you too as a crop farmer. So you need a nutrient analysis. You also need a post-harvest soil nitrate test. And Joe talked about this. The timing of that test is important. He talked about taking it after your last crop comes off or your cows come out of the pasture and before the heavy rains come in. Again, depending on your soil type, whether it's a sandy soil or a heavy soil, you maybe can wait a little bit longer into the fall before you take your post-harvest soil nitrate test. The timing of your test is important because if it rains a whole bunch on it, it's going to wash that nitrate right down and below your root zone. So make sure that you're doing it before the heavy rains come. The method of testing, again, if you are taking your own tests and you don't have all the right tools, it can be a bear to get out there and dig 15 to 30 soil samples a foot deep, put them all in a big bucket, stir them up, and pull that sample out. Ask Aaron to help you. Follow up with your conservation district to see if there are tools. I mean, even a core tool can help you. It's a little bit easier than a shovel depending, again, on your soil type. But make sure that you have the right tools and you're taking a good sample because it needs to be representative of your fields. So method talks about representative of fields. The goal for nitrate, if your fall nitrate level and you have a corn crop, a relay corn crop, 30 parts per million, we probably expect to see that because that corn is not going to continue to take it up. It kind of goes like this. Feed, oh, not so much. You know, corn dies in the fall, so it's still going to leave some nitrate. If you're doing a grass pasture or grass forage system, 20 parts per million, it's a good number. But we don't get into compliance levels. Oops. So every year you do the soil nitrate test. Every third year you need to have all of these things. Organic matter pH, ammonium N, so that's your NH4. Phosphorus, on this side of the mountains, it has to be a Bray test. You may see Bray and Olson. It always has to be a Bray test on this side of the mountains because it won't give you a true phosphorus number if your pH is too high. There we go, that's what it is. We have typically lower pHs, soil pHs on this side of the mountain, so you need the Bray test. Potassium and then electrical conductivity, which is a measure of your salts. And again, on this side of the mountains, that electrical conductivity, probably not as important because we get so much rain, a lot of those salts are washed right down through every year. Organic matter, someone asked about how do you know, and I think Joe probably did a really good job of answering this, but about that residual available nitrate, we always look at organic matter because if you have a high organic matter soil, the soil microbes will convert a certain portion of that to available nitrate, and that's that plant available nitrate. So we always look at organic matter when we're looking at soil tests. It tells us something about how available nutrients will be. So in this particular test, let's see here. Oh, there's your organic matter, 4.4%. There's your pH, 5.9, obviously a Western Washington soil. Ammonium, that is plant available nitrogen. And then there's your Bray test, phosphorus. This is a pretty good number, 26. That's a really good number. If we see above 40, that's more phosphorus than your crops probably need. Again, depending on your crop and depending on your soil type, how available that phosphorus is. There's the potassium number, and then there's your electrical conductivity. There are some great resources out there for interpreting soil tests, and I think that Nicole's probably going to talk a little bit more about some of the availability, nutrient availability, and timing of application, things like that. But there are tons of resources out there for interpreting those numbers on your test. So you're required to take nutrient analysis and soil tests. Application records are another one of the required records. These are pretty extensive, these application records. We want to know where you're applying your nutrients, when you've applied your nutrients, how you've applied your nutrients. And this one's kind of funny. You're like, well, why would you care whether I'm broadcasting or injecting? It makes a difference because if you are using a big gun, you're actually blowing off some of the nitrogen when you're using a big gun or you're broadcasting like a splash plate. So that can tell us something about, you may have your nutrient test that says you have this much available nitrogen. But if you broadcast, you're going to diminish the amount of available nitrogen to your plants. Again, broadcasting, this would be an example of a big gun application. You can see the sprinkler right here. It's going back and forth. That's pretty kind on your field. It's not going to compact your field as much, but you are losing some nutrients when you're using a big gun. So method. What nutrient source are you using? If you did your nutrient analysis, you should be able to tell me what the nutrients were in that for the source of manure that went on your field. And then how much nitrogen and phosphorus were applied, we can do the back calculation. If you've told me how much you put on there, and I have a soil test, or a nutrient test, then we can figure out how many pounds or parts per million of nitrogen and phosphorus you put on there. And then weather conditions. This is a required part of your application records. 24 hours before your manure is applied and the day of your nutrient application. Weather records. It's important because it tells us you were paying attention when you put your nutrients on. Your fields probably weren't saturated and the rain wasn't coming in to wash all those nutrients off your field. So weather records. Oh, let's see here. Nutrients needed and provided by field and year. If you want me to spend the least amount of time possible looking over your records, you're going to do all this math for me before I ever show up at your facility. So one of the things when you're thinking about record keeping that I can't emphasize enough, the more organized your records are and the more complete they are, the less time I'm going to spend sitting at your desk or propped underneath the hood of my car, the tailgate of my car, digging through your records. So if you want to calculate all this stuff for me, great. But show me also your lab reports. I want to see those lab reports when I come in there also. Make notes on there. What crop did you plant on that field in any given year? Did you have a good crop year? Did the crop thrive? If it didn't thrive, it probably didn't pull the nitrates out, and maybe that's why there's a high nitrate level still in your post-harvest test. So make notes. These would be beneficial records to keep what's happening on your ground. Make sure that you're thinking about what other sources of nitrogen came into play for that field. If you planted beans last year, you may have a higher residual nitrogen level left over. So think about what you planted last year, what your soil organic matter is. Again, remember that this contributes a significant amount of available nitrate through the years for a high organic matter. Oh, we're back to weather here. So Nicole is going to talk extensively about the ARM worksheet. There are all kinds of ways to capture weather data. I like the NOAA websites. I like WSU Ag WeatherNet websites. Here's a couple of the different websites and weather sites. You can look at your newspaper and jot down on a calendar what the weather was doing, but keep those weather records. In part, it's protection for you. If I get a phone call on Friday at 2 o'clock that says, so-and-so is applying manure to their field, and I think they're over-applying or they shouldn't be applying. If it is not pouring down rain, if I give you a call or if I show up on your farm and say, when did you apply? Show me your weather records that you were making a good choice, so you were least risk possible. That's part of what the weather records are there for. You can demonstrate to me that you were paying attention to the weather and you were using your best available information to make a good choice about applying nutrients at a specific time. So I can't emphasize enough, keep your weather records. So we had nutrient analysis, soil test, application records. Now we're on to manure transfer records. If you're a crop farmer, maybe you're receiving nutrients from a dairy. If you're a dairy, maybe you have to balance your nutrient needs by exporting nutrients. Either way, you need to keep track of the nutrients received or transferred away. And one of the things that a lot of folks maybe fail to ask for, if they're getting dairy nutrients, what's the nutrient analysis? If you're a dairy and you're shipping nutrients off your site, you should be providing, or at least have it available if asked, the nutrient analysis on those materials, usually dry manure. For my records, I want to see who you moved the material to. If it's more than just a pickup load to Joe's backyard, I don't care about that. But if you're moving quantities of manure, then I want to know where it went and who it went, what their contact information is, their address, how much, and whether you had a nutrient analysis available for that. If you have a nutrient management plan that's written and it's balanced on the fact that you're going to be exporting nutrients, then you should also be able to show me that you have transfer agreements so that I know you'll always have a home for those nutrients, a written transfer agreement. Oh, and here's what some of those manure transfer records might look like. So when, who, how much, what the source was, and then the basic information. So if I saw these records, I'd also ask, okay, so what are the addresses of these folks right here? That's the additional information I would want. The last of the 5 records that we ask for are irrigation records. Again, not quite so important on this side of the mountain. Very few people rely on water rights to irrigate and feed their crops. If you do have a water right and you're using irrigation, then it's to your benefit to record the amount of water that you're using, especially on the east side of the mountains, where irrigation can play a key role in whether nutrients stay in the root zone of the crop or perhaps are driven down by the root zone because they're afraid of losing water rights if they don't use it. Those irrigation records are extremely important. Some people I know just will kick the downspouts out and let the rainwater go in and fill up their lagoon, and that's kind of their irrigation system. They're using kind of a weak water. In that case, you should have a nutrient analysis of what that weak water looks like so that when you're using that as irrigation nutrient application, you still know how many pounds of N you're putting on. So I have a quick question. Does anybody know where this picture was taken? Yep, that's Setsa. You bet. So for irrigation records, total amount of irrigation water applied, and what field was it applied on. So all of these records that we require, if you're a crop farmer, can you see where it would be useful to have this information in your pocket? Yeah, it tells you about how you are meeting the needs of the crop that you're growing. If you're a dairy farmer, it tells me how you're managing your nutrients to be protective of groundwater. It tells the story of your agronomy. So I mentioned that we don't have a compliance path for phosphorus. We do have a compliance path associated with high nitrate levels in the soil. We have a target level of 30 parts per million just generally. If you get up to 45 parts per million soil nitrate in your post-harvest soil nitrate test, then we start with that technical assistance. If you have 3 out of 5 years of those consecutive records of above 45 parts per million in a particular field, like this one right here, field 25, then we're going to start asking you, well, we probably would have asked you before we got 3 out of the 5 years, but to work with your conservation district or your agronomist to try to figure out what a drawdown strategy is. We're also going to be really combing through those records. We're like, okay, show me the application record for field 25. Show me the nutrient analysis for the manure that you put on during that application season for field 25. We really want to see why those numbers are so high. Because if you're over 45 parts per million, especially on the west side of the mountains, the rain's going to come and it's going to drive it down into groundwater. Again, depending on where your groundwater level is, it has the potential to drive that soil nitrate down into the groundwater. There are some things, kind of beneficial records for you to keep personally. If you have really high soil organic matter, you're always going to have kind of a high post-harvest soil nitrate level. So some things to think about. If you had a crop failure and that crop wasn't there to suck up the nitrogen that you put on, you're probably going to have a high post-harvest soil nitrate level. Tell me that so that I know why your soil nitrate's high. There are some issues associated with maybe you're reseeding and you put extra on to get that seed to flush. Maybe you have plowed the sod down the year before, and that will result in elevated soil nitrate levels. So there are a whole bunch of kind of beneficial records you can keep with the required records to tell the full story of your agronomy. Oh, here's an example of a soil test record not demonstrating good agronomy. Right here, they did their report card test on October 1. They had 45 parts per million. So that's kind of at the tippy top. We don't want to see anything above that. Yet on October 22nd, after they did their soil test, they still went out and they put on another 5,200 gallons of water. Did they need that? They did not need that. So this is a case where the report is telling a story of poor agronomy. They did not need to apply more manure. Sometimes you get a little bit stuck. You're like, ooh, I really need that 5,200 gallons of manure gone from my wee little lagoon or tank. There are other ways of managing that manure than putting it on a field that doesn't need the nutrients. And I think Nicole's going to talk a little bit more about that maybe. She'll talk about some of the options. So record keeping. I see records in all manner of scribbled notes, calendars, pages, what have you. As long as they're complete, I can probably figure it out with your help. Again, just to re-emphasize, if you keep your records coordinated, tidy, I'm going to spend less time digging through those things with you. So it really is to your benefit to keep track of these things. There are some tools out there to help you keep records. Again, Nicole's talking about, she'll talk about the application risk management tool that's available. Google Docs, there are some tools being developed to help track required record keepings. N3 is a consultant, and if you hire a consultant, they will help keep track of records for you. Your co-op may help you keep track of records. ODARC, this is kind of cool. It's a program, it's a web program that was developed by Oregon Department of Agriculture for their permitted facilities. So in Oregon, everybody has a permit. They have state permits and federal permits in Oregon. And it's free. I have my farm on here, and I don't really have a farm. I just kind of went in and messed around with it. But it will help you track nutrient applications, cropping systems. You put your soil analysis in there. It does almost everything that we want. It's really a planning tool for you. It's really a good planning tool for you. One of the things we talked about yesterday, it's also a public record. So think about that before using that ODARC. So there's also CAFO Web. You have to pay big bucks for that one. There are options, record keeping options out there. Oh, and that's it. Record keeping in a nutshell. I know that was kind of a long nutshell, but records, regardless of whether you are a dairy or a non-dairy or a crop farmer, kind of help protect you. They tell the story of you being a good steward of the land. They tell your story of agronomy, and they're a requirement for the Dairy Nutrient Management Program and a benefit to all of you. So with that, any questions?